Raiders of the Lost Ark, released in 1982 for the Atari Video Computer System, was the first game released to be based on the adventures of Indiana Jones. But we're not talking about that game today. Since that time, there have been numerous video and computer games based on the long-running Indiana Jones Chronicles, and most of them vary in quality. Whether it be the well-regarded adventure games from LucasArts that graced MS-DOS, or Indy's sole Super Nintendo outing that was also pretty good, or the various NES games of somewhat mixed quality. And then along comes Instruments of Chaos starring young Indiana Jones, released in 1994 for the Sega Genesis, courtesy of Sega of America and Waterman Design. Now if you've never heard of Waterman Design, then don't worry about it. Neither has anyone else, since this was their only video game outing. And it's probably for the best, but I may be showing my hand here too early, so let's move on. Instruments of Chaos places you in the role of young Indiana Jones, a Belgian spy during the height of World War I who has to travel across Europe to prevent the Germans from acquiring superweapons of some kind. Now, since my familiarity with the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles series, upon which this is based upon, lies somewhere within the realm between Jack and shit, I'll just have to take this game's word for it. Upon starting the game, you are given the option to choose from one of 4 countries to tackle: England, Egypt, India, and Tibet. Each country comprises multiple segments, and you have a time limit in regards to completing the level. If you don't complete the level before time runs out, the Germans you're supposed to stop get away with whatever piece of super weapons on the level, and the mission has failed. Of course, the mission has also failed if the end boss of each level defeats you, and once all 4 countries are accounted for in either success or failure, you can then invade Germany and win World War I, or something to that extent. I honestly don't know. On the surface, Instruments of Chaos sounds promising. Non-linear progression, varied environments with somewhat different objectives to complete, the possibility of failure, playing as Indy and making use of the whip to swing across things and climb up structures, things of that nature. You have several options to toggle if you wish, including difficulty setting, limited button customization, sound test, and also being able to choose how many lives you start with. Anywhere up to 9 lives, or you just stick with the 1 life for a real challenge, along with any 1-ups you may pick up along the way. The game gives you this option because you only have 1 shot to beat the game, and once all your lives are exhausted, it's game over. No continues, no passwords, no battery backup, just plenty of lives. Unless you just stick with the 1, but then you're pretty much fucked either way. So as mentioned, you have 5 countries to play through, and you can play 4 of these countries in any order you wish, but they must be completed before you're able to invade the final country, Germany, which is where the evil war machine resides. Whether you manage to succeed in clearing each country or you fail via time expiration or dying at the boss, the stage is nonetheless completed and you move on to the next. In the various countries, you'll have to contend with enemies and other hazards as you make your way from point A to point B. More often than not, you'll have to fight a mini-boss to progress to the next area, but sometimes you'll have to whip some objects to summon a mini-boss, whether it be switches to open a door or something to that extent. Your health meter is represented by this little ink cross in the corner that's easy to ignore because it is rather small. Young Indy has no invincibility frames, so it's entirely possible to be surrounded by enemies and take a dozen or so hits in a short span of time. Young Indy also has no stability, as he may occasionally fall on his ass or be momentarily stunned after a rather lengthy jump. Presumably this was done in some sad attempt to add some semblance of realism to the game, because that always makes the game better. Remember, when you lose a life, you restart the current area, and if you lose all your lives, it's game over with no reprise afterwards. However, the game does provide you with some power-ups that you could come across, including health pickups, additional ammunition, and most importantly, extra lives to prolong the adventure, for better or worse. Sometimes it's the best idea to seek out these helpful pickups as much as possible. So now that we've seen the light, it's time for our faces to melt as we bear witness to the rest of Instruments of Chaos, starting with some of the most horrendous controls imaginable. You walk around with the D-pad and you could double tap a direction to run, but you can also break into a run after a few steps of walking, which is really jarring and can result in you suddenly running into a pit or something. Almost as jarring as the forward momentum in your jumps, which are ridiculous even from a walking or even standing position. This usually results in your running into enemies, which results in you getting hurt, as well as getting some nasty knockback, which means fish can knock you into pools of ice water, which usually means instant death. Actually, not usually, all the time. Speaking of all all your attacks have some delay to them. If you want to shoot a gun, you'll have to wait for Indy to pull out his gun and shoot, which might seem realistic but hugely inconvenient when you have lots of fast moving objects on screen trying to kill you. If you want to throw a grenade, then Indy does this slow lobbing animation to toss said grenade, which is no better than the gun, quite frankly. Oh, by the way, if you have a 6-button gamepad, you press X to lob your grenades. God forbid you try to do it with the stock 3-button pad. And then there's the trademark Indiana Jones whip, or rather this somewhat thin piece of twine that Instruments of Chaos has the temerity to call a whip. It's a slow, cumbersome weapon that comes out slowly, moves about sluggishly, and can be extremely difficult to utilize properly. I like that you could use it to latch onto certain hooks and swing all over the place, or climb upwards to reach higher platforms. The sloppy execution, along with the enemies bouncing you around all over the place, and the absolute shit hit detection makes this a far less enthralling experience, especially on levels that requires the whip to progress onwards, which is ridiculous. There are a ton of problems with this game, starting with control, which we've covered quite a bit, but continuing on with level design, which is mediocre at best and downright atrocious at worst. Hey, let's have a level where sandstorms push you back to the beginning of an area, with no indication to say that you're supposed to hide in these pits, which look like the same sort of pits that would normally kill you if you fall into them. How about we climb this tower that lasts forever, relying on precision platforming and whip-totting skills in a game whose controls are anything but. Let's have a level where lightning strikes all over the place and construction workers can use their jackhammers to knock you off the bridge. Hey, you like hopping on little ice sheets? How about little fishies that can knock you back into the ice water? Both of those are featured in the Tibet level. The game, to its credit, does give you little hints on how to further your quest, such as this level where you need to hop on an elephant to whip the idols, except the elephant is more trouble than it's worth because it's a struggle to hop on top of Dumbo and any attack will cause him, her, it, whatever, to run really fast and leave you behind. Let's not forget the respawning enemies and their big things there. Then I realized I could just jump up and whip the idols and get the job done much more easily without the elephant, but even that revelation did little to alleviate the horrid nature of this overall adventure. Now, it's not all bad with Instruments of Chaos though, just most of it really, I'm afraid, but the visuals aren't too bad. Granted, there's nothing too remarkable about these visuals, but for the most part they're not bad. There are occasional nice effects at times. I like the reflection of the water in the Tibet level, for example. I thought that was a rather nice touch. The characters aren't too bad looking, the settings aren't too bad looking, the telegrams are a rather nice touch. It's not a bad looking game, it's not great, it's not good, but it's not bad, it's average at best. Sound, on the other hand, is a bit of a mixed bag, on the lower end of the spectrum, I think. Musically speaking, it's pretty forgettable fare at best, and pretty terrible at worst. You have this horrible title theme, some generically mediocre tunes in-game, and on top of that, you're greeted with some rather mediocre sound effects and grunting sounds. The tune that plays on the Tibet level is actually not a bad number. I kinda like that, even if it is just a bunch of drums. Funny how the Tibet stage is the only real highlight in Instruments of Chaos starring young Indiana Jones, and that's not saying much because it has the fish that knocks you into the water, so I don't know. Overall, Instruments of Chaos starring young Indiana Jones for the Sega Genesis is a really flawed and ill-conceived video game that has no redeeming value whatsoever. At all. The gameplay is flawed, the controls are atrocious, the mechanics are wretched, and my brain hurts. It's a bad game, everyone. It's a very bad game that's, quite frankly, not worth your time.